My name is Freya Bernard, and for most of my life, I believed family was the one thing that could never truly fall apart. I was 26 years old, working as an interior designer for a small architectural firm. My weekdays were filled with blueprints, client meetings, and endless coffee, while my weekends usually belonged to my grandmother, Clarice Bernard. She was the strongest person I had ever known. Even in her 70s, she carried herself with quiet confidence that made everyone in the room listen whenever she spoke. Unlike many grandparents who spoiled their grandchildren with gifts, Grandma taught me practical lessons. She believed that trust had to be earned, money should never define a person's character, and every important decision deserved patience. Looking back now, I realized she had been preparing me for something much bigger than either of us ever admitted. My parents, Leonard and Elise Bernard, lived across the city in a large modern home. They were successful business owners who spent most of their time managing investments and attending corporate events. Growing up, I often felt closer to Grandma than to either of them. It wasn't because they didn't love me. They simply expressed their love through responsibility instead of affection, and as a child, I struggled to understand the difference. Everything changed 2 years ago. Grandma invited me to her old house on the edge of town, a beautiful 2-story home surrounded by tall oak trees and colorful flower gardens she had cared for herself for decades. The house wasn't luxurious, but every room carried memories. The wooden staircase still creaked in the same places it had when I was 10 years old. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon because Grandma baked every Sunday morning without fail. That afternoon, she asked me to sit with her on the back porch. The autumn air was cool, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass across the yard. "I've made an important decision," Grandma said, placing a folder carefully on the small wooden table between us. I looked at her with curiosity. She opened the folder and slid several documents toward me. "This house will belong to you one day." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I stared at the papers, then back at her. "Grandma, are you serious?" She smiled softly. "I've thought about it for years." I immediately shook my head. "I don't want you to feel like you have to give me anything." "This isn't about obligation," she replied. "This is about choosing the person I believe will protect what this family has built." Her words stayed with me long after I drove home that evening. For the first time in my life, I imagined building my future inside that house. I pictured renovating the upstairs bedrooms, turning one room into my own design studio, planting fresh flowers beside Grandma's roses, and eventually raising a family there someday. It wasn't about the property's value. It was about everything that house represented. Over the next several weeks, I visited Grandma almost every weekend. We talked about furniture, renovation ideas, and old family stories. She even laughed as we debated whether the old wallpaper should finally disappear after 30 years. Everything felt peaceful, until one ordinary Tuesday morning. I received a notification from the county property office. At first, I assumed it was another routine document related to Grandma's estate planning. Instead, the message informed me that ownership records for the house had been updated. Confused, I opened the attached file. The property was no longer listed under Grandma's name. But it wasn't under mine either. The house had been transferred into the name of a family investment company. My heart immediately began pounding. I called my father without thinking. He answered after several rings. "I was going to explain everything," he said before I could even ask a question. "What happened to Grandma's house?" I demanded. "It's complicated." "I don't want complicated. It's temporary." Those 2 words only made me angrier. Later that evening, both of my parents insisted we meet at their house. They calmly explained that transferring the property into the investment company would provide financial protection and asset flexibility. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every answer created even more questions. "What about Grandma's promise?" I asked. No one answered directly. Instead, my mother simply reached across the table. "Please trust us." But trust isn't something you can request after hiding the truth. I left their house that night feeling betrayed. The following days became strangely quiet. My parents stopped calling. I stopped answering Grandma's messages because I couldn't bear hearing another explanation that made no sense. The future I had imagined inside that old house disappeared almost overnight. As weeks turned into months, resentment quietly replaced hope. I convinced myself that my parents had taken something that was never theirs. And the worst part was that everyone around me seemed to believe their version of the story. I had no idea that the people I blamed weren't the ones who had actually stolen my future. For nearly 6 months, I avoided my parents completely. At first, I expected one of them to call and explain everything honestly. I imagined my father admitting there had been a mistake or my mother showing up at my apartment with documents that would finally make sense of the situation. Neither happened. Instead, the silence between us grew heavier with each passing week. Grandma continued calling from time to time, but our conversations became painfully short. "How have you been, Freya?" "I'm fine." "When are you coming to visit?" "I've been busy." It wasn't true. I simply couldn't bring myself to return to the house that no longer felt like it belonged to me. Work became my escape. I accepted every project my company offered, even assignments that required long hours and weekend site visits. My coworkers assumed I was chasing promotions, but the truth was much simpler. Keeping myself exhausted hurt less than thinking. One rainy Thursday afternoon, everything changed. I was eating lunch alone at my desk when my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. "Miss Bernard?" "Yes." "This is the County Tax Administration office." I frowned. "There appears to be an issue involving a property connected to your previous mailing address." My previous mailing address? The Bernard residence on Willow Creek Road. The moment I heard Grandma's address, my stomach tightened. What kind of issue? The annual property tax statement was returned because the listed contact information appears to be incorrect. "I don't own that property." There was a brief pause. "Our records show that you are still listed as the beneficiary contact." That made no sense. If I'm only the beneficiary contact, why are you calling me? "Because the authorized financial representative has been unreachable." "And who is that?" The employee answered without hesitation. "Ms. Ravina Damaris." The name sounded familiar immediately. Ravina had attended almost every major family meeting I could remember. She was introduced as the family's financial consultant years ago. Elegant, professional, always carrying a leather portfolio filled with documents. She rarely spoke unless someone asked for financial advice. Everyone respected her, including my parents. After ending the call, I searched through old family photos on my phone. Sure enough, Ravina appeared in birthday dinners, holiday gatherings, business celebrations, even charity events. She wasn't family, yet somehow she had become part of nearly every important decision. Curiosity slowly replaced anger. That weekend, I drove to the financial consulting firm where Ravina worked. Her office occupied the top floor of a sleek glass building downtown. The receptionist smiled politely before leading me into a spacious conference room overlooking the city skyline. A few minutes later, Ravina entered carrying a tablet. She looked exactly as I remembered. Perfectly tailored navy suit, silver-framed glasses, calm smile. "Freya," she said warmly. "It's been a long time. I received a call from the tax office. I assumed you eventually would." Her answer surprised me. "You knew?" She nodded as though we were discussing the weather. "Administrative systems aren't always updated correctly. So, why is your name attached to Grandma's house?" She folded her hands neatly on the table. "I manage financial paperwork for several Bernard family assets." "Does that include the house?" "It includes many things." Her responses were careful. Too careful. Every question I asked received an answer that sounded complete without actually explaining anything. Finally, I looked directly into her eyes. Did my parents authorize everything? Without missing a beat, she smiled. Every document was processed according to legal procedures. That wasn't an answer. Not really. I thanked her for her time and left the building with even more questions than before. As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun reflected brightly against the surrounding office towers. I had almost reached my car when someone called my name. "Miss Bernard." I turned around. A man in his early 60s stood near the employee entrance. He wore a maintenance uniform and carried a toolbox. "I don't mean to interfere," he said quietly, glancing back toward the building. but I recognized you from the photos in Mr. Bernard's office years ago. I'm sorry, do I know you?
No.
He lowered his voice. I've worked maintenance here for almost 15 years. I waited. He looked around once more before speaking again. People think accountants only move numbers. I frowned. What do you mean? Sometimes they move ownership. A chill ran through me. I don't understand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded note. I shouldn't even be giving you this. He handed it to me quickly. Written on the paper was only one sentence. Check the investment company's public filings. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Before I could ask another question, the man walked back inside the building without looking back. I unfolded the note again inside my car. 5 simple words. Yet somehow they felt more important than every conversation I'd had over the past 6 months. For the first time since losing the house, I stopped asking whether my parents had betrayed me. Instead, I found myself asking a completely different question. Why would a complete stranger risk warning me? The note stayed in my purse for 3 days before I finally acted on it. Every time I looked at those 5 handwritten words, I wondered if I was wasting my time. Check the investment company's public filings. It sounded simple. In reality, I had no idea where to begin. On Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to the county records office downtown. The building wasn't impressive. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, while dozens of people quietly searched through public records using computer terminals. I approached the information desk. I'd like to review public filings for Bernard Strategic Holdings. The clerk typed the company name into her computer. Are you an officer of the company?
No.
Shareholder?
No.
She nodded. Public filings are available. Internal records are not. That's fine. A few minutes later, she handed me temporary access to one of the research terminals. I expected to find only routine paperwork. Annual reports, tax summaries, property registrations. Instead, I found hundreds of documents dating back nearly 12 years. For hours, I opened file after file. Most meant nothing to me. Legal language, financial disclosures, corporate amendments, everything blurred together. By late afternoon, I was ready to give up. Then one document caught my attention. Property Collateral Amendment. I clicked it. The address was unmistakable. Grandma's house. According to the filing, the property had been pledged as collateral for a large investment portfolio 18 months earlier. I frowned. That timing didn't make sense. Grandma had promised the house to me nearly 2 years ago. Why would she suddenly allow it to become company collateral? I continued reading. The authorization signature belonged to my father. At least that was what the document claimed. I enlarged the scanned signature. Something felt strange. I opened another filing signed by my father from 4 years earlier. Then another. Then another. The signatures looked similar, but not identical. The older signatures flowed naturally. The one attached to Grandma's house looked stiff, almost copied. I wasn't a handwriting expert, but I knew enough to realize something wasn't right. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. I needed someone who understood legal documents far better than I did. Only one person came to mind: Gideon Loxana. He had served as Grandma's preferred notary for almost 20 years before retiring. As a child, I remembered him visiting our family during important legal meetings. Grandma trusted him completely. I found his office listed online, though it now operated only 2 days each week. Fortunately, that Tuesday happened to be one of them. The office occupied the second floor of an old brick building several blocks away. Everything inside felt frozen in time. Tall bookshelves filled with legal volumes. Wooden furniture polished from decades of use. The faint scent of old paper drifting through the room. An elderly man stood as I entered. Freya Bernard. His warm smile softened immediately when he saw my expression. It's been far too long. I need your help. Without another word, he invited me inside. For nearly an hour, I explained everything. Grandma's promise. The ownership transfer. The tax office call. My meeting with Ravina. The mysterious note. Finally, I placed the printed documents in front of him. I don't know if I'm imagining things, Gideon adjusted his glasses and began reading. The room became completely silent. Occasionally, he compared one signature against another. Sometimes he leaned closer. Sometimes he wrote short notes on a yellow legal pad. Nearly 2 hours passed before he finally looked up. His face had changed. "What is it?" I asked. He slid one document toward me. "Look closely." I stared at the signature again. "I already have."
No.
He pointed toward the lower corner. "Look at the pressure marks." I blinked. "I don't understand." When someone signs naturally, the pen pressure changes throughout the signature. He opened another verified document. "See the difference?" Only then did I notice it. The genuine signatures varied naturally. The signature approving Grandma's house looked mechanically consistent. Almost perfect. Too perfect. Gideon leaned back slowly. "I cannot officially declare this without a forensic examination." My heart pounded. "But..." He met my eyes. "If you asked whether I believe the signature was written by your father..."
He paused.
My answer would be no. The room suddenly felt smaller. For months, I had convinced myself that my father knowingly took Grandma's house. Now the foundation beneath that belief began to crack. Could someone have copied it? I whispered. "It's possible." "Legally?"
No.
Silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question I had been avoiding. If my father didn't authorize this, then someone else benefited from making everyone believe he did. I left Gideon's office carrying copies of every document he had marked. Outside, the afternoon traffic moved as though nothing in the world had changed. But everything had changed. For the first time, I considered a possibility I had refused to entertain. Maybe my parents weren't hiding the truth. Maybe they had been trapped inside the same lie. That evening, I spread every document across my apartment dining table. I compared dates, names, company filings, authorization forms, transfer approvals. Patterns slowly began appearing. One name repeated again and again. Not as the owner, not as the beneficiary, not even as the company director. Always listed under the same title. Authorized Financial Representative, Ravina Damaris. The more documents I reviewed, the more often her name appeared. It was almost as though every important transaction had quietly passed through her hands. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Until that moment, Ravina had simply been my parents' trusted financial consultant. Now, she had become the center of every question I couldn't answer. After my meeting with Gideon, I stopped reacting emotionally and started paying attention to facts. If Ravina had manipulated the paperwork, I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed as suspicion. For the next 2 weeks, I quietly gathered everything I could. I revisited the county records office. I requested certified copies of every public filing connected to Bernard Strategic Holdings. I organized them by date across my apartment floor. Slowly, a timeline began to emerge. Every major transfer involving family assets had one thing in common. Ravina had processed every single one. That alone wasn't enough to accuse her of anything. She was the family's financial consultant. Of course, her name appeared everywhere. But something else caught my attention. Several filings had been submitted on days when my father was documented to be overseas attending international business conferences. His passport records, which had been publicly referenced in a corporate disclosure, confirmed the travel dates. Yet somehow, signatures supposedly made by him appeared on documents filed back home during those exact same days. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. I called Gideon immediately. "I think I found something." Within an hour, I was sitting across from him again. He carefully compared the filing dates with the travel records. Finally, he nodded. "This isn't coincidence." "What does it mean?" "It means someone wanted these documents processed while your father couldn't personally verify them." I felt my pulse quicken. "So, what do we do?" Gideon closed the folder. "We wait." I stared at him. "Wait." He smiled slightly. "Your grandmother invited me to your parents' anniversary dinner." I frowned. "She invited me too." "I know. Does she know what's happening?" He looked at me for a long moment. "I believe your grandmother knows far more than she's been telling either of us." The anniversary celebration arrived 3 days later. It was held in a private ballroom at one of the city's oldest hotels. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Soft piano music echoed through the room. Nearly 100 guests filled the tables. Business partners, old family friends, relatives I hadn't seen in years. I almost turned around before entering. Then I noticed Grandma standing near the stage. She gave me a small nod, just enough to remind me why I had come. Across the room, my parents welcomed guests with practiced smiles. Neither of them seemed to notice me. Ravina, however, did. She walked over carrying a glass of sparkling water. "I'm glad you decided to come," she said pleasantly. "I almost didn't. Family celebrations have a way of healing old wounds." Her smile never changed. Neither did mine. "I hope you're right." She excused herself a moment later to greet another guest. I watched her disappear into the crowd. She looked completely relaxed, completely confident, as though nothing in the world could threaten her. Dinner passed quietly. People laughed. Servers moved between tables. A slideshow displayed photographs from my parents' 30 years of marriage. Everything appeared perfect. Then Grandma slowly stood from her seat. She tapped her glass gently. The room became silent. "I'd like to say a few words." Everyone turned toward her. My father smiled. "I've shared many wonderful years with this family," Grandma began. "I've watched children become adults." She looked toward me. "I've watched trust grow." Then her expression hardened. "And I've watched trust be abused." The room fell completely silent. Grandma reached beneath the podium and lifted a small black flash drive. "I believe everyone here deserves to know the truth." I felt every muscle in my body tense. One of the hotel staff connected the flash drive to the ballroom projector. The large screen flickered. A video file appeared. The recording showed a conference room I recognized immediately. It was inside Ravina's consulting firm. The timestamp revealed it had been recorded almost 2 years earlier. Several employees sat around a table. Then Ravina entered. She closed the door behind her. "We'll process the Bernard property with the investment package," she said calmly. One employee hesitated. "But won't Mr. Bernard need to approve the collateral documents personally?" Ravina smiled. "He won't be available." "What if he reviews them later?" "He'll see what we decide he sees." The room on the recording became quiet. Another employee spoke carefully. "And the original ownership? It creates unnecessary complications." Ravina answered without hesitation. "We simplify the paperwork first." Someone off camera asked another question. "What about Miss Bernard?" Ravina laughed softly. "By the time she notices, she'll blame her parents." The ballroom around me exploded with whispers. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. For nearly 2 years, that had been exactly what I did. I blamed my parents. I pushed them away. I convinced myself they had stolen my future. Across the room, my mother covered her mouth with both hands. My father stared at the screen in complete disbelief. Then he slowly turned toward Ravina. She was no longer smiling. For the first time since I had known her, she looked afraid. The ballroom erupted into complete chaos. Conversations overlapped from every direction. Guests stood from their seats. Some stared at Ravina. Others looked at my parents. A few simply watched Grandma, trying to understand how she had uncovered everything. I remained frozen in my chair. The recording was still playing on the giant screen. Ravina's voice echoed through the room. "Once the paperwork is consolidated, no one will question the ownership history." Then the video ended. Silence followed. It lasted only a few seconds. Ravina suddenly stood. "This recording has been manipulated." Her voice was steady, but the confidence I had seen earlier was gone. "My legal team can prove it." Grandma looked at her without saying a word. Then Gideon slowly walked onto the stage carrying a thick folder. "I expected that response," he said calmly. He opened the folder and removed several certified documents. "The recording is only one piece of evidence." Every guest watched him. The county records confirm the filing dates. He placed enlarged copies on display boards beside the stage. The signatures do not match verified originals. Another document followed. Mr. Leonard Bernard was outside the country when several of these authorizations were supposedly signed. A quiet murmur spread across the ballroom. Gideon continued. We also requested an independent forensic handwriting analysis. He lifted another report. The conclusion is clear. He paused long enough for everyone to focus on him. The signatures were traced from previous documents. Gasps echoed throughout the room. I turned toward my father. He looked stunned, almost heartbroken. Not because of the accusation, because someone he had trusted for years had betrayed him so completely. Ravina's expression hardened. You have no idea how complicated corporate finance works. No, Gideon replied. I understand exactly how fraud works. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ravina reached into her handbag. My heart skipped. Instead of pulling out paperwork, she removed her phone. She quickly began typing. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the ballroom exit. She's leaving, someone shouted. Several guests instinctively stepped aside. Ravina pushed through the crowd without looking back. I watched her disappear into the hotel corridor. My father immediately reached for his own phone. I already contacted the authorities before tonight began, Gideon said. They should be here any minute. Almost as if on cue, 2 uniformed police officers entered through the main entrance, followed by 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Division. The room became silent again. One investigator approached Gideon first. He accepted the folder containing the certified evidence. Another officer walked directly toward Ravina, who had been stopped near the lobby by hotel security after attempting to leave through a service exit. Even from inside the ballroom, I could see her arguing.
She pointed toward my family.
She pointed toward the investigators. She even pointed toward Grandma. Nothing changed. Several minutes later, the officers escorted her back through the lobby. This time, everyone saw it. The woman who had managed our family's finances for over a decade was leaving under police supervision. No one spoke. No one applauded. They simply watched. After the investigators left with Ravina, the anniversary celebration ended almost immediately. Guests quietly gathered their belongings and went home. The music had stopped. The decorations suddenly felt meaningless. Only close family members remained inside the nearly empty ballroom. For several long moments, no one knew what to say. Finally, I looked at my parents. I'm sorry. My voice barely rose above a whisper. I should have listened. Neither of them answered immediately. Then my mother walked toward me. Tears filled her eyes. She wrapped both arms around me. I hated watching you believe we betrayed you, she whispered. I wanted to tell you everything. Why didn't you? She stepped back. Because we didn't know enough. My father joined us. The moment we suspected financial irregularities, we started investigating quietly.
He sighed.
But Ravina controlled nearly every document. Without proof, he continued, accusing her would have destroyed the company and divided the family even sooner. I lowered my head. I spent 2 years blaming you. You were manipulated, my father replied. So were we. Grandma slowly approached. She rested one hand on my shoulder. This family almost fell apart because one person understood that suspicion spreads faster than truth. No one argued, because she was right. Over the following weeks, investigators uncovered far more than anyone expected. The house was only one piece of a much larger scheme. Ravina had quietly created multiple shell companies using different corporate names. Assets from several clients, not only my family, had been shifted between those companies to disguise missing funds. Properties had been pledged as collateral without proper authorization. Investment accounts had been altered. Financial reports had been rewritten before reaching their owners. The fraud had continued for years. Every new discovery revealed another victim. By the end of the investigation, dozens of families had joined the criminal case. The woman everyone trusted had been deceiving almost all of them. When I read the investigators' final preliminary report, one realization stayed with me longer than anything else. If Grandma hadn't spoken that night, if Gideon hadn't kept searching for proof, I might have spent the rest of my life believing the wrong people had stolen my future. 3 months after my parents' anniversary, the trial finally began. By then, the investigation had grown far beyond my family's case. Financial experts testified for days. Forensic accountants explained how millions of dollars had quietly moved through a network of shell companies. Handwriting specialists demonstrated exactly how signatures had been traced from legitimate documents and transferred onto new paperwork. Former employees from Ravina's consulting firm took the witness stand one after another. Some admitted they had questioned unusual instructions, but were told everything had already been approved by the Bernard family. Others confessed they had been too afraid to speak because Ravina controlled their careers. Every testimony painted the same picture. The fraud had never depended on complicated technology. It depended on trust. Ravina had earned everyone's confidence first. Then she used it against them. When it was my turn to testify, I wasn't asked about financial records. Instead, I described what had happened to my family. How quickly suspicion had replaced communication. How easily I believed the people closest to me were capable of betrayal. Leaving the witness stand was strangely emotional. Not because I was afraid, because I finally understood how much time I had lost. Several weeks later, the court delivered its verdict. Ravina Damaris was found guilty on multiple counts, including financial fraud, document forgery, criminal conspiracy, and large-scale embezzlement. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The court also ordered the seizure of properties, investment accounts, luxury vehicles, and business interests that investigators proved had been purchased using stolen funds. Every remaining asset connected to the fraudulent transactions was frozen. For the first time in years, the victims had a chance to recover at least part of what they had lost. A month after the verdict, Grandma asked me to visit her house. The same house. The one that had started everything. When I arrived, she was already waiting on the back porch with 2 cups of tea. The afternoon sunlight spilled across the garden, making the roses seem brighter than I remembered. For a while, we simply sat together in comfortable silence. Then Grandma reached into a leather folder resting beside her chair. "I've been waiting for this day." She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a new property deed. I looked at the first page. Registered owner. Freya Bernard. My hands began to shake. I read the document again. Then a third time. It was real. Completely legal. Properly registered. No investment company. No collateral agreement. No hidden conditions. Only my name. I looked at Grandma. "You could have done this years ago." She nodded. "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" She smiled gently. "Because I wanted to be certain no one could ever use this house against you again." I felt tears gathering in my eyes. "I'm sorry." She tilted her head. "For what?" "For doubting everyone." Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You made the best decision you could with the information you had." She paused before continuing. "But never forget this. The truth and the complete story are rarely the same thing." Those words stayed with me long after that afternoon. Over the following months, life slowly returned to normal. My relationship with my parents healed one conversation at a time. There was no dramatic moment that erased 2 years of pain. Instead, trust returned through ordinary dinners, weekend phone calls, birthdays, small acts of honesty. Eventually, I moved into Grandma's house. Not because it represented wealth, because it represented a second chance. I renovated the upstairs bedroom into the design studio I had once dreamed about. The old wallpaper finally came down. The wooden floors were restored. The garden remained exactly as Grandma loved it. Every Sunday, we baked together in the same kitchen where she had taught me to make cinnamon bread as a little girl. Sometimes my parents joined us. Sometimes they stayed long after dinner, talking and laughing until late in the evening. The silence that had once divided us was gone. Looking back now, I realized the greatest thing Ravina almost stole wasn't the house. It was my family. The property was returned. The money was recovered. Even the company's reputation slowly healed. But the lost years could never be replaced. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this. Never let assumptions become stronger than conversations. The people closest to you deserve the chance to tell their side before you decide they're your enemy. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story kept you guessing and you enjoyed every twist along the way, don't forget to subscribe, Leave a comment sharing which moment surprised you the most, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you in the next one.